extremely low casualty rates. I think before this began, people were talking about losing perhaps 2 or 3% of the aircraft sent on any mission, on any sortie. So the figures right now are very low, which indicates either tremendous skill on the part of U.S. pilots or very bad resistance on the part of Baghdad, or perhaps a combination of both.
We are, as you obviously know, in the process of sort of sweeping up the day's information now before we tuck in for the evening. Anything else out of the Pentagon that you want to add before I go over to Bill Greenwood at the White House?
I guess the question here, Ted, is the same one that's on the minds of the administration and other people in the Gulf, which is what, if anything, are the Israelis going to do in return for the Scud missiles fired on them by Iraq last night? That is the big unknown, the big question. Obviously, since there were very few casualties in Israel, surprisingly few, I think people here hope that maybe the Israelis can restrain themselves, won't have to respond. But if they don't respond, as you know, Ted, from your experience in that part of the world, it would be very much out of character for them. So that's the big question mark. What are they going to do? And it's not so much a military question as a diplomatic one. If they take military action, obviously that raises all sorts of diplomatic questions, complicates the issue, and I think that's what people here are concerned about.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was about to make the transition to Bill Greenwood by saying, Bill, it is a diplomatic question, and to what degree has there been any effort by the U.S. government over the course of the past few hours to get in touch with the Israelis and to suggest that perhaps it would be better if they restrained themselves a little bit longer?
Well, Ted, we do know that Secretary of State Baker has been in touch with top leaders in Israel and has sought their assurances that they will do nothing to undermine the coalition. We don't know if he got those assurances. We don't know if President Bush may have picked up the telephone, as he so often does, and telephoned those same people himself. And that is one of the big problems here at the White House. I don't recall a time in my years here in Washington where there has been such impossible access to officials at all levels of the government. In all past crises, to my recollection, there has been someone here at the White House all night long to at least tell us they can't tell us anything. Tonight, the doors are locked. The press secretary to the president, Marlin Fitzwater, has been inaccessible all day long. The people that work under him are gone. There isn't even a clerk here in the White House that we can talk to. This, we are told, indeed it is, the largest American military operation since the Vietnam War. And I recall during that period seeing Lyndon Johnson walk into the press room unannounced at hours as late as this to just talk to reporters and tell them what's on his mind. We have had no access to George Bush, and it seems to me rather strange that they are not trying to at least reassure the public in a more direct way. When you read the transcripts of all the news conferences that have been held here today, there's very little real information in them.
They clearly have come to a conclusion, Bill, that they are better served by keeping us at arm's length, both in Saudi Arabia and back here in Washington. And who knows? They may be right, but I know that we will keep trying to get the information, and perhaps as this operation continues, they will ultimately come to the conclusion that it is in their best interest, and certainly the public's best interest, to let some of that information out. Bill Greenwood, before we let you go for the night, I don't know whether it's just fatigue or my hearing playing tricks on me, but it almost sounds as though someone's tapping on a drum out there, are they?
There are several people tapping on drums. There are some Indians that have been across the street since this war began, contesting the U.S. involvement. They're much louder tonight than they have been in the past, maybe because it's cold outside. They're trying to warm up. I don't really know, but they have maintained an around-the-clock vigil. There are about 75 people now in Lafayette Park across from the White House, outnumbered by police, I might add.
All right, Bill Greenwood, thanks very much. Appreciate your help. We're going to take a break. We're going to have a final discussion with some foreign journalists about what has transpired and what is yet likely to transpire when we come back in a moment.
ABC News coverage of the Gulf War will continue after this.
This good boy shares what he has with the rest of his class. This bad boy doesn't. only one, Jeep Cherokee Sport.
Save $700 on new 1991 Jeep Cherokees.
Next time you're dining out, we invite you to try something sparkling. Something that won't cost a thing. Just pick up a packet of Equal. There, the blue one, and taste. We think you'll be so surprised by the great taste of the one with NutraSweet. You'll want to buy a box of Equal for the next time you're dining in.
Iraq attacks Israel and Saudi Arabia. Missiles hit Tel Aviv and Haifa. Stay with the experience of Peter Jennings and the people of ABC News tonight.
Joining us now here in Washington, 3 journalists from the Middle East who have very patiently and very graciously been with us all night long, waiting for an opportunity to express their point of view and give their analysis of what is happening and what is yet likely to transpire in this operation. Let me introduce them to you. Hisham Melim is a Lebanese journalist. Yuri Nir is the Washington correspondent for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. And Hamdi Fouad, an old friend, is the Washington bureau chief of the Egyptian newspaper, the most influential newspaper in Egypt, Al Ahram. Hamdi, again, thank you so much. I know you've been here for hours. Pick it up anywhere you like. Comment on what's been happening during the day and on what you think the impact is likely to be, first of all, in your own country, in Egypt.
You know, after 2 hours in Cairo and after 1 hour in all the Muslim countries, the prayers will start in the mosques. So it's Friday and the prayers, and then this event where 7 or 8 missiles have been launched against Israel. So the reaction will be a little bit mixed here. People would feel a little bit relaxed that at least there is a country like Iraq which has shot these missiles in the direction of Israel. But in the meantime, we must not forget, as Fitzwater said, quoting the president, that the liberation of Kuwait has started. So there are 2 separate problems here. The problem of liberation of Kuwait and the problem of these missiles which have been launched against Israel. Then there is another very important problem. I believe Saddam Hussein has won the headlines of the newspapers for today, which was supposed to be yesterday, but now it's today. Yesterday he was the front page because he was attacked by the unified forces or the joint command of the Allied forces. Now he has attacked Israel. So in a way, the Palestinians felt after the first day that they have been dropped. Now when he has done this, I feel they will feel very happy that now at least this man could do something. Then everybody was expecting that the Scud missiles are not active enough. With his mobile Scuds, he could succeed to throw these rockets in the direction of Israel. He was trying to prove that there is a kind of connection, there is a kind of relation between the Palestinian problem and the Gulf problem, and in a way he started to succeed to do this. But in the meantime, I feel that there is a kind of split in the Arab world. For sure, Egypt, at least, myself, we are against the occupation of Kuwait by Iraq. And on the other side, there is a problem which for every Arab is quite a big problem, is a problem of the Palestinians. If we remember well, Israel penetrated Lebanon, occupied Beirut in '82, and nothing happened. Now, because some missiles have been fired in the direction of Israel, this is not the end of the world. So I believe we have to separate between 2 things. And we have to concentrate on the same problem which we are dealing with, that Kuwait has to be liberated, that Saddam Hussein has to withdraw from Kuwait. Then the Middle East problem will come afterwards. You see, I met many Arabs, and in Washington, sure. Everybody was telling me, what happened? why this man did not fire any rockets in the direction of Israel. When he has done it, I felt that they are more relaxed than before. So he was trying to keep the Palestinian issue as the only issue he is interested in, while this is not the reality. You see, Iraq was attacked by Israel and they have destroyed their atomic reactor. But Iraq did not react against Israel in any time. Now they have done it, and they have proven that they have got missiles which can go in this direction.
Hamdi, let me just interrupt you for a moment so that I can bring in a couple of our other guests. Yuri Nir, as I said, is a Washington correspondent for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. There is reflected in Hamdi Fuad's remarks, even though his country is allied in the coalition with the United States against Iraq, almost a certain level of satisfaction that Iraq has launched at least a symbolic attack against Israel. That's the problem, isn't it? That these two issues have become almost inexorably intertwined.
Oh yes, I think that it was in a way Saddam Hussein's way to sort of bring in the linkage, the famous linkage, if not from the diplomatic door, to try to bring it in from the military door. And I think that what was done today was Saddam Hussein's way to not only, I mean, I don't think he only aimed at Israel, aimed at the civilian concentrations in Israel. I think he also tried to aim at Arab regimes. And I think that in a way, his doing that was an attempt to create a certain amount of upheaval in Arab countries in order to topple Arab regimes. And I would certainly assume that the Egyptian regime was one of those regimes that he aimed at.
To what degree do you think he'll be successful?
Oh, I don't think that he'll have any success in the near future, but I think that he certainly has a quite a considerable amount of potential success to at least shake those Arab regimes, namely Syria, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Not to topple them, probably, not at least in the near future.
Hisham Milim, the degree to which there is sort of these mixed feelings, satisfaction on the one hand that there has at least been some kind of military action by Iraq against Israel, and at the same time the need among most Arab regimes to bring Saddam Hussein to heel. How do you reconcile that?
It may not be reconcilable. But allow me to say this before I answer the question. The first thing that came to my mind when the war took place is how little control Arab peoples have over their destiny. Saddam invaded Kuwait, did not consult anybody. King Fahd brought the foreign powers, he did not consult anybody. And now all of us, millions of Arabs, are watching on the sidelines, helplessly, others shaping and reshaping the future of the region and our future. This is going to contribute to that sense of helplessness and rage, if you will, disillusionment that's already sweeping the Arab world. There is also, people may have the transient satisfaction over a symbolic act of defiance on the part of an Arab leader, albeit is seen as a rogue leader. But this is a transient thing. In the end, when the dust settles, Iraq, a major Arab country, Baghdad, a great center of culture throughout Arab history, will be pulverized. In the process of liberating Kuwait, it will be also pulverized. The challenge was always for us since August 2nd, how to restore Kuwait without destroying Iraq. Now we will probably, both will be destroyed in a way. And that sense of helplessness, notwithstanding the symbolic act on the part of Saddam Hussein, and it's essentially a political attack rather than a military attack, this is not going to change the problem. And it seems to me we have to come to grips with this. We are going to end up with a region that is in turmoil. If Israel goes on the offensive, it will probably draw Jordan into the fray. You have an alliance that is not based on anything other than expediency. You're dealing with Arab governments, most of which have a legitimacy problem. It matters very little what giving Arab governments say. most of their people are not satisfied with the existing order. And that's why, no matter what the Egyptian president would do or the Saudi monarch would do, Israel's involvement in a major war is going to put additional strains on these governments. As it is, some of these governments who are in league with the United States are very reluctant, they are very uncomfortable with this, and they would have to keep an eye on a restive population, a population that Saddam Hussein managed to exploit their genuine feelings, albeit to serve his own immediate parochial objectives, but nonetheless,
let me just interrupt you for 1 second. We only have about 30 seconds left, and then I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you all off. And let me, before I do that, thank you all not only for your patience, but also your eloquence. You spoke a moment ago, Hisham, of an almost uncontrollable rage. I simply want you to answer one question. When the dust settles, against whom will that rage be directed, do you think?
My fear, Mr. Copper, it will be directed inwards. You are dealing with a wounded culture. It's true that some of these wounds were inflicted by the West, the traditional enemies of the Arabs, Israel, and what have you. But many of these wounds were self-inflicted, and they are just as deep and just as dangerous. The challenge for us, it's a moral, political challenge, is how to deal with these problems. And my fear is we're not doing enough to deal with them, and we are going to end up with a devastated region and with more despair.
Thank you all very much. Hisham Melim, Yurinir, Hamdi Fuad, I'm very grateful to you for bearing with us all evening long. To bring you up to date with events at this hour, we are coming up on 3 a.m. Eastern Time, 11 in the morning in Baghdad, 10 o'clock in the morning, Friday morning in Israel. Iraq's Saddam Hussein made good on his threat today, sending Scud missiles into Israel. Between 7 and 10 missiles hit targets from Haifa to Tel Aviv. There was relatively minor damage caused to the civilian population areas that were hit. 12 people received minor injuries. And the missile fired at Saudi Arabia was apparently hit in turn by a U.S. surface-to-air missile before it struck its target. The question of Israeli response has yet to be answered. There is, in fact, a cabinet meeting that is going on in Israel this morning to address that question. There are now 5 Allied jets reported down in this conflict. 2 U.S. Navy jets have been hit, as well as a British, Kuwaiti, and an Italian fighter. Bombing sorties have continued since the war began more than 30 hours ago. The French Defense Ministry reports their warplanes hit an Iraqi ammunition dump south of Kuwait City. And the Tokyo Stock Exchange took a roller coaster ride on Friday, but the Nikkei index closed up 361 points. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington for all of us here at ABC. Before I say goodnight, 2 things. We will, of course, continue our live coverage. I'll be joined in just a moment by Mike Schneider, who will pick up, and then Peter Jennings will be here at 7 o'clock this morning for a briefing from Saudi Arabia by General Schwarzkopf. And we go out now on some of the extraordinary footage that was shot by an ABC cameraman we have now learned in Iraq yesterday when the bombing raids began. Good night.
This has been ABC News continuing coverage of the Gulf War.
War in the Gulf. When news really matters, it really matters where you get your news. ABC News, monitoring the war and the world 24 hours a day.
Californians share their western boundary with a race of giants. The blue whale, the California gray, the orca, and the majestic humpback all pass along our shores. Once heavily hunted, they've begun to make a comeback. You can help. Start by learning more about the great whales and the California coastline we all share.
Whoever thought an English teacher from West Virginia would be teaching in Budapest with the Peace Corps?
By the people, for the people.
There's a lot of work ahead of us, but I can't think of any job I'd rather have.
Peace Corps, the toughest job you'll ever love.
A crisis in the Persian Gulf.
The liberation of Kuwait has begun.
At times like these, you need the latest information.
This is an historic moment.
Stay with ABC News and Channel 7 for the information you need to know from around the world and around the Bay. Channel 7 is here throughout the crisis with local hourly updates, news, and reaction from around the Bay Area, keeping you informed ABC News and Channel 7. Experience you can count on.
Not everything destroyed in the rainforest can be replanted. You can help. Join cultural survival. Join the human race.
Bay Area reaction to the Gulf War, Friday after Nightline on Channel 7.
ABC News coverage of the Gulf War continues. Now from New York, Mike Schneider.
Good morning to you. It is now midnight in Los Angeles, 3 a.m. on the east coast of the United States, 11 a.m. Baghdad time. What we're going to do right now is begin and try to take you through this night, keeping you informed of the major events as they have occurred thus far. Situation essentially is this: the Israeli cabinet, in the headlines right now, is meeting in emergency session to decide if and when to retaliate for the Iraqi missile attack. At least now, from the count that we are getting, at least 7 of those Iraqi Scud missiles did hit Israel along the Mediterranean coast, ranging anywhere from Tel Aviv up to the port city of Haifa. About a dozen people were injured, but we're told at this point those injuries are not serious injuries. Jordan, in response to the activity of the drawing in of Israel into this situation, has now put its security forces on the highest state of alert that they have been since the Arab-Israeli War of 1967. And we're now being told that a second U.S. Navy jet has been lost over Iraq. The Pentagon has now identified the first casualty, the first flyer who was shot down, as Lieutenant Commander Michael Spiker. He was based in Mayport, Florida. We're going to go live to Tel Aviv right now, where ABC correspondent Bill Siemens, who I'm now told is in our Jerusalem bureau, is standing by live to update the situation there. Bill, what can you tell us?
Well, good morning, Mike. The latest is that Prime Minister Shamir is meeting with his cabinet, and of course the big question is what to do. The big question, how should Israel express the feeling that all the officials have been expressing when asked, and they answer, we shall decide how to defend Israel, whether to retaliate and risk the war with Arab states, thus complicate the American position. Thus far, they have, for a number of hours now, absorbed the first strike.
Bill, is there any indication that Israel has, at this point, prepared a retaliatory strike, or what does the status of their security forces remain at this hour?
Well, as usual, the Air Force is on super top alert and is ready to go when it gets the go-ahead. So the answer is yes, they are ready to launch a retaliatory strike. The Chief of Staff, General Dan Shimron, said that plan has been worked out months ago. So they're ready to go. All they need is the political decision, which is the most difficult one.
As we talk right now, we're going to put up some video of the result of those Scud missiles hitting into Israel. Give us a description, if you will, of the areas that they struck and the kind of damage and the casualties.
Well, some of the missiles struck in the southern region of Tel Aviv, which is primarily a working-class area, and some of the damage is quite extensive. But when you look at it, you're really surprised that only a dozen people were injured, and only lightly to medium injuries. This, I think, is kind of a minor miracle. I think the fact that the casualty toll has been low for something like this, and the fact that the Iraqis used conventional explosives and not chemical weapons, not poison gas, has been a restraining factor, one of the reasons why Israel has not lashed back automatically.
What is the sense there, Bill, that this was one of perhaps a series of shots to come, and that is there contemplation that the possibility of chemical weapons being used is still looming out there rather large?
Oh, absolutely. The Israeli public is not relaxing today, and neither are the civil defense authorities. Everyone is being kept indoors. Again, only essential workers are out on the streets. They are being warned that it's not over until it's over.
What about the decision-making process in terms of retaliation? This decision is not made by the Prime Minister alone?
This decision is made by the Prime Minister and the members of his cabinet, and he has said with the consensus of the opposition led by labor leader Shimon Peres. Shimon Peres has publicly joined Prime Minister Shamir in what was called an emergency forum, not joining in a national unity government, but an emergency committee, a public show of unity in this hour of crisis.
Israel, as our viewers I'm sure are well aware, has been deeply divided along political and inter-religious lines. Do you see a great coming together in crisis times like these?
Well, anyone who knows Israel and the Israelis has known that in the past, you know, they fight like cats and dogs in political battles ordinarily, but when it comes to a moment of national crisis, they come together in one solid fist.
What is their attitude this morning from what you've been able to gather about what has happened to them and about the stance that they have taken apparently at the behest of the United States? Would you anticipate that there's going to be resentment either within political circles or just in the larger general public?
No, Mike, I truly think with the depth of the experience that I have here is that the Israelis are really trying to help the United States and help keep the U.S. coalition together, not cause complications for the United States. They're bending over backwards to stay out of it. Never have the Israelis absorbed a strike like this.
That's an interesting point, too, because, I mean, one of the central tenets of Israel, of Zionism for that matter, was the establishment of a state where Jews could live as freely as Jews and also pretty much not rely on anybody else to defend them.
Absolutely. And carrying out that very theme that you mentioned this morning is, I don't know how many times I've heard the allusion to the poison gas used by Hitler, and is it going to happen again? And a lot of those who wanted a preemptive strike to lash out at the Iraqi launchers before they could send missiles are especially using that allusion.
What about the status of the Palestinians throughout Israel and in the occupied territories as well? Are they subject to the same restrictions as they were yesterday, and have we heard anything in the way of reaction from them?
Mike, they are sealed off in the West Bank and Gaza, or even as strictly as possible. The only opening there is prayers are being allowed at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the Sharam al-Harif above Temple Mount. But the people going in there are being screened very carefully so that no troublemakers get in. You know, as far as their reaction in general, which you asked, they definitely have a new Superboy today after Saddam Hussein struck at Israel.
We are going to take a look now, Bill, at the donning of the gas masks as it happened after the initial warning went out last night. Give us an indication of the psychology at work there when you suddenly find yourself in a position where you're putting on something that you've probably put on before for practice, but this time there's the dreadful possibility that this is not practice and that what you're up against is something that is horrendous.
Absolutely. The sirens went off at 2:10 in the morning. I happened to be in the hotel, and we were ordered to gather in the gas shelter room, and everyone had to listen to the radio, and there was a television set in the room also. In the room were about 25 various people, and the pressure, the tremendous pressure I felt was on the mothers who had the infants with them, who were put in these plastic cages, which amounted to gas masks because infants cannot wear the regular gas mask. There was no panic. It was amazing how calmly, tensely but calmly, they followed the instructions, which were coolly given over radio and television, and coped with the situation in a very strong manner.
Yeah, those of us who live in the continental U.S. and who have spent virtually all of our time here or close to here have never had to come face to face with the possibility of being attacked. This country hasn't been, the mainland. So I wonder if Americans can relate to what it is like to live under the threat of bombs raining down on your homeland.
I don't think so. You know the old story among Americans, those of us who have served in the armed forces, and especially those who have served in the infantry or the Marines, they come home and how many times have you heard them say, you know, I really can't tell anybody what it's like except someone else who's been in it. And that's the way it is here.
Well, you have been, and we appreciate your being with us this morning to fill us in on the latest developments. Bill Siemens, reporting from the ABC Bureau in Jerusalem this morning. Our thanks to you, Bill. We're going to switch over now to the Pentagon right now. Correspondent Steve Shepard is standing by live there. Steve, briefings have not been a part of life at the Pentagon for the past several hours. Have we been able to pick up any more information about the current status of the American forces?
There's very little coming out of here at this time, Mike, and as you know, there have been very few briefings since this conflict began yesterday. The next scheduled briefing, as you alluded to earlier, is at 7 o'clock Eastern Time tomorrow morning in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, where General Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of U.S. and other forces in the Persian Gulf, is scheduled to tell reporters the latest about the fighting in the Gulf. Nonetheless, of course, we get bits and pieces of information throughout the day, some of it not very exact, a little rough. But basically what we do know is that the tremendous number of sorties flown yesterday was duplicated today. Probably 1,000 sorties by American aircraft, Air Force and Navy and Marines, flying all over the areas of Kuwait and Iraq, hitting targets in northwestern Iraq, southeastern Iraq, and down into Kuwait. The takeoffs and landings are going on around the clock. The bad news for the United States is that we do know at least one other naval aircraft has now been lost. That's 2 that we know of. The British have lost another one, so they have lost a total of 2. Still, airplane downings have been very minimal compared to what we expected when this conflict began, and I guess that's the good news.
Steve, regarding the incidents drawing Israel into this crisis, have we been able to pick up anything at the Pentagon about any possibility of Israel intending or moving towards taking retaliation?
Obviously, the Pentagon and the administration hopes that the Israelis can find a way, can find an excuse to keep themselves out of this thing. I think that so far the view here is that the Israelis have shown a good deal of restraint. I myself cannot remember a time in my experience as a newsman here and overseas when the Israelis were hit by anybody and didn't immediately hit back. The fact that they've held off for several hours now is a bit of a surprise to me. They hope here that they'll hold back, that they won't get involved, that they realize the Israelis would like to stay out of this thing to keep the United States and its coalition partners together. But I don't think they really know what the Israelis are going to do. And until that cabinet meeting in Jerusalem is over, not many other people know what they're going to do either.
Well, Steve, as you well know, the Scud missiles were not fired only at Israel. There has been apparently confirmation that there was the Scud fired at a U.S. base in eastern Saudi Arabia. We have video of that right now. It's slow-motion video of the response to that, in which one of America's new Patriot missiles was rocketed skyward towards the Scud missile. That bright light you'll be seeing any second now is the result of the Patriot missile intercepting the Scud. It's at the top of your screen, and igniting the Scud so that it falls harmlessly to Earth as shrapnel as opposed to coming to Earth as a bomb and blowing up. Steve, this is one of the Pentagon's new weapons, not what you're seeing right now. That, of course, is the Scud missile made by the Soviets, modified eventually by the Iraqis. What you're looking at right now is the Patriot interceptor. What do we know about this missile? This is really the first time it's been tested in battle, is it not?
First time that it has been used in an actual battle as opposed to operational testing, that kind of thing. The missile comes in a battery of four per vehicle. It was designed primarily as an anti-aircraft missile to attack at medium range jet aircraft and other kinds of planes which might be attacking U.S. forces. It was discovered apparently in the testing process that it also could be modified and used as an anti-missile missile. And it's obviously worked this evening in downing a Scud missile which was fired in the direction of Dhahran in Saudi Arabia. So it worked pretty well in its first actual test. The Israelis have some doubts about it. They have some Patriot missiles too. They apparently like them as an anti-aircraft weapon, but think that as an anti-missile weapon it is somewhat limited because after all that's what it was not. It was not primarily designed to be an anti-missile weapon. But it can be used as such, and the U.S. Had some luck with one tonight.
All right, Steve, thank you very much. Steve Shepard reporting for us live from the Pentagon. We'll be taking a break right now. Come back in a couple of moments, and we'll be talking with the Crown Prince of Jordan. Stay with us.
Now, learn to read with Hooked on Phonics. Because Hooked on Phonics is set to music, The right and left brain work together with dramatic reading results. After learning one 18-minute lesson, it's possible to read book one, over 120 pages. So for the beginner or anyone needing reading help, get hooked on phonics and learn to read. Call 1-800-ABCDEFG, 1-800-ABCDEFG.
Know where I am? I'm at one of the finest resorts in the world. I love it because everything is right here. I can relax in the sun, eat marvelous food, enjoy a room with an ocean view. There's fabulous entertainment, friendly service, and it's all included in the price. But what makes this resort really fun is that it takes me to some of the world's other great vacation spots. Take a 3, 4, or 7-day fun ship vacation on Carnival, the most popular cruise line in the world.
If after test driving a Sterling, you find another car with all of its standard features and appointments for $28,500 or less, we'll do more than congratulate you. We'll buy it for you.
Back once again right now, continuing our coverage of the war in the Persian Gulf. Throughout the crisis which preceded the war, there has been much talk about the country in the middle, that namely being Jordan, wedged between Iraq, Syria, and Israel, and how the Jordanians perceived their role in this entire situation and what actions, if any, they might take should war eventually break out as it ultimately did. We want to discuss the situation in Jordan as it exists right now with Crown Prince Hassan, who is in Amman. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mike.
Can you give me an indication as to the status of the situation in your country right now? Are you expecting hostilities there?
Well, you know, as we've said all along, we didn't choose our neighbors, and this region has become a laboratory for high-tech weapons, and we look at dismay at the loss of civilian casualties spiraling potentially in this escalating war, and God forbid, yes, we are in the middle, and if shooting starts in a wider conflagration, and now we see Turkey possibly being pulled into this. We see attacks on Israel, which, of course, are further attacks again, as we've seen on live coverage on civilian targets, and this is extremely alarming for all of us in the region. We've made it clear that we are going to effectively attempt to defend our land and our airspace to the best of our ability against all comers. We will not be a corridor.
You have, your brother King Hussein has made a strong statement just a few days ago, guaranteeing once again to make sure that the airspace of Jordan, in addition to the land, is protected and not violated. Yet isn't it true, sir, that in order for those Scud missiles to get to Israel, they had to pass through Jordanian airspace?
I don't know what the trajectory of those missiles was. As I said, we have no missile capability, but in terms of aircraft, clearly it would be very difficult indeed for Jordan to accept aircraft from any side. And as you know, we have the multinational force to our south, the Iraqis to our east, and the Israelis to our west, and have clearly every intention of defending ourselves. We've said from the beginning we have no intention of becoming the killing ground in this.
If Jordan does determine that those missiles, the Scud missiles from Iraq, did indeed pass through its airspace, what, if anything, does it plan to do about it?
Well, clearly we've made it as forcefully and abundantly clear to everybody concerned that we do not intend to become a trajectory or a corridor. I think it will be rather difficult to define. We have to wait and see, but we, A, have no non-conventional weapons, B, no missilery. We don't even have the protection measures. I was watching the steel rooms and the gas masks and all the rest of it, so we are extremely vulnerable, and we have every justification to be objective in this thing.
If the Israelis do or did decide to retaliate and did decide to either send planes or missiles through Jordanian airspace, what would the reaction of your country be?
Well, as you said, if it were a question of aircraft through our airspace, clearly, whether from one side or another, we simply have to defend our airspace to the best of our ability, but that clearly runs the risk of pulling everyone into this growing tragedy. And the Israelis, of course, are talking about measured response where they weigh the political risk against the military option. As far as missiles are concerned, we have no competence in that field, but things are certainly escalating. After all, they started in high gear. It started at the peak escalation with the massive attacks on Iraq, and we simply hope that this does not extend further. I'm glad to have heard a confirmation today. I think that the Turks have not yet allowed the aircraft to leave their bases, but we are living in an interdependent world, and God knows how this region will look a week from now.
Tell us a little bit about what the state of mind is within your country. We were told yesterday that there was, especially within the Palestinians living in Jordan, tremendous sense of despair and anger and resentment that in some cases was being turned against Westerners. Has that, as we approach 11:20 Baghdad time, what time is it in Jordan right now, sir? Is it also 11:20 or is it an hour?
No, it's just past 10 o'clock now.
10 o'clock. What is it as we approach that time in your country? Are the people there angry? And how is that anger being manifested?
Well, I think there's a lot of cold anger and a genuine sense of shock at the massive attacks against the Iraqi targets. We were told yesterday over the news wires of, in yesterday's early hours alone, something like 18,000 tons of explosives, and one commentator said that was equivalent to Hiroshima. Now, I know that's spread all over Iraq and all over tactical targets. We are assured that surely this will be at the expense again of civilian targets. So the bitterness is already there, and it is obviously going to escalate. Not necessarily against Westerners or anyone else, but just this feeling of nihilism that this war-torn Middle East simply is being subjected once again to another major trauma.
Well, sir, we must leave it there. We do appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning. Thank you, sir. Crown Prince Hassan, who was talking to us from Amman, Jordan. Of course, if you've been watching our coverage, and we certainly hope that you have, you know by now that ABC News was the first to show the dramatic footage of that initial U.S. bombing mission into Iraq and the results in Jordan. Excuse me, I should say the results in Baghdad. What you're seeing right now will be shortly the bombing that apparently began with the U.S. Tomahawk cruise missiles coming in, and the flurry of gunfire, automatic weapons fire, tracer bullets, anti-aircraft aimed upwards by the Iraqi forces trying to do what they could to control the skies. U.S. pilots have said that they have never seen anything quite like this. They've equated it with a 4th of July. That is a water tower in Baghdad you're seeing right there, and a multitude of various different types of weaponry being fired skyward, aimed at, what in all probability was at that point, cruise missiles that were zipping by, or perhaps stealth bombers. We are not exactly sure at this point. That videotape was brought to us by our camera crew over there, Sebastian Rich and Nigel Baker, and we're being joined by both of them right now. They're with ITN, our affiliate, who is, they supplied us with all the incredible footage that you've seen. Good morning to both of you.
Can I just correct you first of all that the very exciting footage of the anti-aircraft fire and the cruise missiles coming in were actually shot by one of your ABC cameramen, Fabrice. The rest of the footage was compiled by us and another network, so altogether it's a team effort.
In the flow of information here, sometimes we do get confused, and I appreciate you setting me straight on that. Needless to say, though, you were there when it happened, and I would appreciate it if you could just give us a sense of what it is like to see that much military hardware being fired off in that short a period of time.
Sorry, could you say again? We seem to have missed the first part of your question.
I'm sorry. Give me a sense of exactly what goes through one's mind when suddenly it seems like the whole world is exploding in front of you.
Well, how it happened for us is that we were actually on a line to our office in London who were giving us the order to pull out, and we had agreed to pull out and start packing. We were walking down the hotel corridor when it all happened. We dived into one of the rooms to look out of the window, and it was quite an awesome sight. Our first gut reaction was to run down to the air raid shelter, the bunker downstairs, because we didn't know whether there was going to be carpet bombing or selective bombing at that time. So we initially went down to the bunker. When we thought things are marginally safer, if you can think they are safer, some of us scrambled up, including myself, to the room to grab one of my cameras and set up another camera and let it run on remote, go back down to the bunker and to film the reactions down there. But Fabrice, your cameraman, the ABC cameraman, was up there all the time with his night scope camera and is showing you the amazing footage that he got.
Now, this was taken, we should emphasize, as you just said, with a night scope camera, so I suppose that a lot of the projectiles look a lot more vivid than they would to the human eye, per se. But needless to say, there was an awful lot of material being fired.
It does get, yes,
we are going to, by the way, take a break right now. If you hold on for 1 second, we're going to take a break right now for our local stations. Cut away right now. We'll continue this conversation. We'll see more of the video and continue our conversation with Sebastian Rich and with Nigel Baker in just a moment. So our coverage continues. Local stations can break away.
This is Barry Serafin in Washington. We continue our coverage now of the Persian Gulf War. The latest news, of course, is what happened last night when Iraqi Scud missiles, several of them, hit targets in Israel. This is something that Iraq had threatened all along. Apparently there were several. There were no fatalities. There were several injuries said to be minor, perhaps a dozen. And in Israel right now, there is debate going on as to whether or not Israel should retaliate, something the United States hopes very much will not happen because it does not want to risk pulling apart the Allied coalition. Baghdad Radio does confirm the missile firing, saying our missile forces have hit what it calls political and economic targets in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and other areas. In the meantime, U.S. and other Allied air power continues to fly in waves against Iraqi targets. And we have with us in our Washington bureau Richard Hallion. He's an author and a student and expert on the use of air power. And I wonder, Mr. Hallion, what do you make of how that part of this war has gone so far?
I think that in this war, air power has demonstrated truly that it has global reach and global power. We have seen episodes in previous military history where air power has been decisive. But in this situation, we see a case in which air power has proven to be overwhelming. I would say that the Iraqi defense forces and military forces literally did not know what hit them. What made these attacks the success they are is the courage and dedication of the air crew, their training, the fact that people were operating with a single integrated operational plan, and the fact that we had the vindication of the high technology approach that the countries of the Western Alliance have pursued since the 1960s.
There was talk yesterday as the war got into its second day, in effect, of using A-10s against Iraqi radar and communication sites. Now, A-10s are normally, I gather, tank killers. They're quite slow, not normally built for this purpose. Does that say to you that Allied forces indeed essentially own the air?
I would say so. It also demonstrates the fact that the weapon systems that we have procured tend to be swing roll systems. You can use them for a multitude of roles, not merely one specialized purpose.
The report so far, Iraq is claiming, as you perhaps know, 65 Allied planes downed. Apparently, it's about 6, according to Allied sources. I assume you take that also as a sign of quite remarkable success.
Absolutely. We've seen a very low attrition rate here. We regret, of course, very much the loss of any air crew in an operation of this sort, but it is encouraging that the attrition rate is so low.
Thanks very much, Richard Hallion.
Thank you.
And ABC's coverage of the Persian Gulf War will continue in a moment.
War in the Gulf. When news really matters, it really matters where you get your news. ABC News, monitoring the war and the world 24 hours a day.
A crisis in the Persian Gulf.
The liberation of Kuwait has begun.
At times like these, you need the latest information.
This is an historic moment.
Stay with ABC News and Channel 7 for the information you need to know from around the world and around the Bay. Channel 7 is here throughout the crisis with local hourly updates, news, and reaction from around the Bay Area. Keeping you informed, ABC News and Channel 7. Experience you can count on.
Pesticides, overpopulation, chemical dumping,
acid rain,
overgrazing, prolonged drought, toxic waste. A plague stalks our wetlands. Only you can prevent. Support Ducks Unlimited.
The Oakland East Bay Symphony is back. For tickets, just play one of our favorite numbers.
465-6400.
Popeye, look!
Oh, what's a little plastic in the water gonna hide?
Doesn't he realize critters is strangulating in all this plastical junk? He's got to help.
No!
Sees how yous likes it. Huh? I can't do it all myself, peoples. I needs your help.
To find out how, call 1-800-CMC-CLEAN.
Bay Area reaction to the Gulf War, Friday after Nightline on Channel 7.
ABC News coverage of the Gulf War continues.
Updating the headlines as we take a look at the latest situation in the Gulf War. So far, Israel has not retaliated for the missile attack that Iraq launched last night. At least 7 of Iraq's Scud missiles landed in Israel. All of them, we're told, had conventional warheads. A dozen people were injured in the attack, but none of those injuries are listed as serious. Another Iraqi missile was aimed at Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, but it was shot down by a Patriot anti-missile from the United States. That was the first combat test for the Patriot missile system, and it obviously passed. Oil prices have been on the roller coaster. Well, they closed the day in Tokyo, not much different from where they began. A barrel of North Sea Brent crude was going for $19.70. That is up 20 cents from yesterday's closing in New York. If you were with us for the last half hour, you know that we were showing you some of that dramatic video that was shot by an ABC News crew in Baghdad as the initial wave of U.S. and Allied bombers converged on Baghdad and began to drop their loads, and also Tomahawk cruise missiles came in and did their damage as well. Extraordinary video showing what some pilots have said to be the most incredible barrage of anti-aircraft fire they have ever seen. This is once again tracer bullets, anti-aircraft bullets, apparently some surface-to-air missiles as well, going in, going after the Allied forces during the initial attack on Baghdad as it occurred just last night. It may seem longer than that, but the situation is only about a day and a half old, the war that is. Among the various Western camera crews who have been in Baghdad but are now out are Sebastian Rich and Nigel Baker, camera person and producer respectively for ITN. They have taken the road from Baghdad out there in Amman, Jordan right now, and they're joining us once again live. Gentlemen, thanks for being back with us.
Good morning.
Give me a sense, if you will, please, about how you got out of the country. One gets the sense in this country, at any rate, given the situation, that that's got to be an arduous and rather perilous trip. Was it nerve-wracking for you?
Well, originally we were told by the Iraqis if the time ever came to leave, they would give us safe conduct out of the country on a government bus escorted by government personnel. That didn't materialize. What happened was that the situation occurred that we were given a document to leave the country, but in fact we were it's not the usual sort of exit visa. We were separated from that. We got to the border. We had to talk our way across the border without all the necessary paperwork, and it was very daunting because there was an air raid en route. We passed late last night near the town of Rutbah, what appeared to be started with anti-aircraft fire. Then there were 2 blinding flashes, lit up the sky bright orange. We took these to be cruise missiles landing on what we understand were probably Scud missile bases nearby.
Was there any time when there were any hits close to your caravan, or any time when you actually felt your physical well-being was in
sorry, we
serious
can't hear
danger?
the question.
All right, we'll try to raise the audio a little bit at your end. Was there any time when those hits came close enough to your convoy, to you, that you felt truly endangered?
Well, we were separated from the convoy. In fact, it became rather fragmented. I would estimate that it was about 15 miles probably from us when we first saw it, but there was no immediate danger from the actual shrapnel or the blast. What did concern us was if there was a large-scale air raid, it might harden the attitude of the Iraqis towards any Western people, any Western faces trying to leave, and it would make the task of getting out of the country all that much more difficult.
You mentioned large-scale air raid. One gets the feeling that given the number of planes that have gone over and the number of cruise missiles that were fired, that it was large-scale, yet from all appearances, there is no widespread destruction, that this pinpoint bombing, as it's called, apparently is just that.
It is extremely accurate. In the hotel that we were staying, the Al Rashid, after we knew what was going on, we felt extremely safe. I mean, it's a very strange term to use, but after a while it became apparent that the cruise missiles or the stealth bombers were going for exact targets, i.e. the Ministry of Defence, the Communications Centre and the airfield. Now all this is within a kilometre radius of the hotel that we're staying in, so we felt strangely safe.
What kind of impact has it had, as best as you can tell, on the Iraqis themselves? We often hear about people being quote-unquote shell-shocked after bombing raids. Are the people in Baghdad showing that?
Well, they're not shell-shocked. What they are shocked about is that they had this great faith in Saddam Hussein, and we have Iraqi colleagues who I won't name too much, but they have almost changed their views overnight. Now they're saying, oh, please God, stop this. Bush may be mad, but Saddam, he's mad too. Please let this stop.
What's their feeling on their part? Do they anticipate that this will end? And if they do, how do they anticipate this will end?
I think it's very difficult for them to say at the moment, because they had this, the Iraqis generally had this preconceived idea, or at least one they stated publicly, that Saddam was an Arab hero and he would lead them to victory in the Gulf. Now they're obviously having to take stock again very, very quickly. For the first time, I think a lot of them are living with the thought of possible defeat. It's hard for them to cope with. I think that obviously it's a time of great reflection for them, and a lot of people there are genuinely scared.
The people themselves, though, are they getting the word? What is the Iraqi media doing to inform the people about what's going on, and what is their particular perspective?
Well, obviously the Iraqi media is state-run.
He's also a musical director.
The interesting thing was last night on the way out that we were at one particular police post. An officer came out, apparently in glee, saying that Baghdad Radio had announced 44 Allied aircraft had been shot down. Obviously, that figure, I now believe, has gone even higher according to their claims, which conflicts greatly with the 6 mentioned by, I understand, the Western authorities. So it would seem that their spirits are being buoyed by that sort of information. The Iraqi newspapers yesterday, obviously we didn't see the normal copy of the English language newspaper, the Baghdad Observer, that failed to appear at our hotel. But by and large, they obviously are fed a very pro-government line, and obviously Saddam's speeches and thoughts on the situation.
All right, gentlemen, I just want to express my gratitude for you both being there for us this morning. Sebastian Rich and Nigel Baker of ITN. Gentlemen, congratulations on your safe transit. Godspeed home, and thank you once again for being with us. We're going to take a break right now. We will be back with more coverage in just a moment.
Now, learn to read with Hooked on Phonics. Because Hooked on Phonics is set to music, the right and left brain work together with dramatic reading results. After learning one 18-minute lesson, it's possible to read Book 1, over 120 pages. So for the beginner or anyone needing reading help, get Hooked on Phonics and learn to read. Call 1-800-ABCDEFG, 1-800-ABCDEFG.
If after test driving a Sterling, you find another car with all of its standard features and appointments for $28,500 or less, we'll do more than congratulate you. We'll buy it for you.
Continuing our coverage now of the war in the Persian Gulf, we're going to go to the White House. Correspondent Bill Greenwood is standing by live there. Bill, obviously we don't expect any statements overnight, but have we heard anything at all about the reaction to the latest turn of events in the Persian Gulf?
Well, earlier in the evening, Mike, as you probably know, the president issued a news release, a statement from his press secretary expressing outrage over the attack on Israel. He said that it was something that should be condemned. He did not say much else. Secretary of State Baker has talked by telephone with Israeli Prime Minister Shamir. We do not know if President Bush called the Israelis. I would not at all be surprised. He's very prone to make personal telephone calls. The president went to bed at a relatively early hour for him, considering the magnitude of this crisis. The lights were out by midnight in the residence of the executive mansion. He should be getting up around 5 if he holds to schedule. There has been very little information coming out of the White House. The lights in the Situation Room, which is in effect the Crisis Command Center, were burning rather bright as I arrived here this morning. There seemed to be a lot more activity than last night, which surprised me, considering the fact that last night was the beginning of the U.S. attack.
Is there great fear or great efforts underway to deal with the possibility of Israel deciding to take action to retaliate for the Iraqi missile attack?
Well, I think that's absolutely true. It's something that is of deep concern to the Bush administration because it could jeopardize the entire coalition. There is no way officials here can predict how the Arabs would react should Israel launch a strike against Iraq. Jordan particularly has indicated that it would not approve of such action, and we don't know what might happen. But there are other options the Israelis could conceivably take, such as perhaps hitting terrorist targets in Lebanon. That would, I think, have a less dramatic repercussion for this coalition.
Bill, yesterday, during their briefing, the one briefing they had yesterday, the Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Colin Powell, both tried to warn the public against undue optimism about getting on the emotional roller coaster. But are we seeing any of that up and down with within the administration itself?
Those are exactly the words that President Bush himself used yesterday when he met with joint congressional leaders. He said there would be ups and downs, and he was not going to react as things do go up and down. He has been surprisingly quiet considering the magnitude of this operation, and I think he's trying not to go from one mood to another.
Do we get any sense, though, where they keep warning us not to expect short war, not to expect things to go all the U.S. way? Do we get any sense about what they really expect themselves, or are they kind of just following the game plan and seeing where it leads?
I think they have a very definite game plan, and I think the real turning point might be when those ground troops become engaged. It will not be quite as sterile a hostility. The airplanes, as you know, are quite more insulated from casualties. That is something we can probably see a big change in the mood here if and when it gets to that.
Are they expecting much in the way of political problems, either with the peace movement that has sprung up throughout the country and or on Capitol Hill?
Not yet. Things seem to be going their way, and I think one good example was the effort by some Democrats in Congress yesterday to push through a resolution of support for the American military forces, not a resolution supporting the president's effort. The Republicans quickly nipped that in the bud, and the final draft of the resolution that passed in the Senate 98-0 not only supported American forces, but President Bush.
Well, the president has certainly had no trouble getting his message out. We're seeing now that the rating services have indicated that more people watched the president make his statement regarding the war on television a few nights ago than any other television event in the history of broadcasting, with the exception of President Kennedy's funeral. My question, I guess, is does the administration resent the coverage that the anti-war demonstrators are getting?
I think they're certainly resigned to it. They know that they're going to get covered, and they are doing, I think, a pretty good job of orchestrating the way in which we get their message out. They're telling us no more than they want to. If you look at the transcripts of briefings that have been held in this town in the last 2 days, here at the State Department, also at the Pentagon, there's a lot of comment. The officials have had a lot to say, but when you really look at the printed words, they're not giving us much information.
What about the Allies? Does the administration view the Allies as living up to their obligations at this point?
Absolutely. So far, they've had nothing but cooperation. They just hope it keeps going. I'm sure they'd like to have a lot more support in terms of men and material and money to help pay our bill, which could